Hello and welcome back to another episode of Beyond the To-Do List. I'm your host, Erik Fisher. This is the show where I talk to the people behind the productivity. I'm thrilled this week to share with you a conversation I had with one of the people behind my productivity. It's Michael Hyatt. It's always great for me to sit down and talk with Michael in person or over a podcast where you get to listen in. This week we're talking about his brand new book, Free to Focus. It's out now. You have to get it. It is one of the best productivity books out there because it is based on the Free to Focus course and workshop that I have attended and gone through, and now the book. It is distilled down into some of the best productivity workflow information for you right now, practically to apply to your life. Not only do we talk about that, but we talk about some practical implementation of some of Cal Newport's Digital Minimalism and how Michael took that digital minimalism approach and applied it to his smartphone. That is the second half of this conversation, and I'll just get out of the way and say, enjoy this conversation with Michael Hyatt. Well, this week, it is my privilege to welcome back once again to the show, Michael Hyatt. Welcome back.
Hey, thanks, Erik. Great to be with you again. I don't know how many appearances I've had on your show, but I'm always honored.
Yeah, I should have looked it up. We were just talking pre-show that obviously Jeff Goins is, I think, still the reigning champion, but not by much. And, that's important to him because he's so competitive. But that you, by doing less appearances, do more, doing less to do more, because that's what productivity is all about in a lot of ways.
That's exactly right. And that's the whole premise of my new book, Free to Focus, to achieve more by doing less. So, Jeff, read the book and you won't have to do so many appearances.
That is great. And I'm leaving that in. So, Mike, you've been on the show so many times. We've talked about a number of different things. I mean, you were on before you even had books out other than Platform, obviously, but specifically productivity books. I mean, you came out with Living Forward, Best Year Ever, and now Free to Focus. Although those didn't come out in that order. I think the first thing was the Best Year Ever course, and then there was the Living Forward book, then there was the Best Year Ever book, and now and there was Free to Focus, the course, obviously. By the way, I really like the idea of creating a course, having people go through it, and then creating the book versus having a book come out and then doing book tours and seminars about the book.
Well, here's why it works better that way. The most permanent form that content can assume is a book. And it's much more difficult to change it once you get it into a book format. But the best way to do it is first as a live event, because you get immediate feedback, then you can change it. The second best way, or the second most permanent, is a course, because now you're committing video and audio and workbooks and all that stuff. But you can still change it. It's still pretty easy. And we have typically reshot my courses every year. But then the final step is to actually have a more permanent form in a book. So I like developing content in that sequence. It allows me to get the most input and go through the most iterations before I'm really committed to something that can't change very easily.
Well, and thinking about that, actually, in my personal experience with the Free to Focus formula and strategy is that I took the online course. I also attended the event and now have gone through the book. And now that I'm thinking about it, the distilling down into appropriately the focused information for this book is amazing. Let's set the book in its proper context. So from where I see it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Living Forward is this macro level. It's life planning. It's the entirety of your life.
Yes.
Best Year Ever drills down to, obviously, it's in the title, Best Year Ever. Free to Focus, though, which goes right along with the Full Focus Planner, which is a quarterly planner, 3 months, doesn't just stop there, though. It also goes down into your ideal day and your ideal week, but also a quarter. I mean, am I appropriately placing Free to Focus in where it goes in this kind of series? You're not going to come out with, your best minute ever, right?
Yeah, right. But that's exactly the right sequence. I think of Living Forward, and it just kind of logically happened with the release of the books. Living Forward is kind of the 35,000 foot view, what you see from the airplane, the curvature of the earth, the long distance view. And then your Best Year Ever is like the 10,000 foot view where, you can see buildings, you can see some of the things on the ground, but it's a year view. And then Free to Focus is really sort of the runway view. It's where the rubber meets the road and where we execute and implement all the goals and vision and all that stuff we've created previously.
Now, some would say then, well, don't I have to go through the books in that order? And I would even say, you know what? Free to Focus is probably maybe in some people's, lives where to start to get some leeway to then be able to even tackle some of the best year ever stuff and then even the living forward stuff.
Yeah, totally. I'm all about the quick win. And I think that one of the complaints I have with the life planning process is that you got to go away for a day, you got to find a day and go away and do your life plan. And then you still have to implement it. So you could start wherever you want. And some people have the energy for that and the vision for that. And, God bless them, let them start there. Some people want to dig in from an annual perspective, to lay out the next year or the next quarter. But this is stuff that you can get a lot of quick wins very quickly and really make some significant improvements in the way you execute and kind of in your lifestyle and your margin and all the rest. Free to Focus offers that.
So obviously in the title of the book, Free to Focus, there's this inherent hinting at freedom that is to be had from going through the book and implementing it. So let's talk about that freedom. What is that freedom?
Okay. Yeah, one of the things that I noticed with productivity books, and I started into productivity, first of all, in college. I had a day planner and I was really into productivity, read a lot of books on time management. And then in 2004, I started my blog. At the time, it was called Working Smart, and it was all about my productivity hacks and what I was learning. But I quickly found out that for a lot of people, and even for me for some period of time, I found that productivity had become an end in itself, just sort of this endless quest for the right apps, the right way to organize, the right ways to be more efficient. But then I discovered that, when productivity is that, it becomes all-consuming. There's never an end to it. If you start with a 12-hour a day and shave it back to 8 hours because of your productivity hacks and improvements in apps, you quickly fill that time right back up with additional work. So more ends up being more. So I felt like, no, that's not what I want. I want productivity to be a means to an end. And the end for me is freedom. I want the freedom, and I talk about this in the book about 4 specific freedoms. The freedom, first of all, to focus on my most important work, to do that deep work, as Cal Newport calls it, that creative work that actually drives my business and my life forward. But I also want the freedom to be fully present with the people I love and the people I work with. And, how often have we seen somebody at work who's distracted by a text message from home because something, is out of control at home and they've got to stop and they've got to go tend to that. Or even worse, when you're at a restaurant and you see people on their smartphones, they're not present at all. They're present with people that aren't even there. And then I want also the freedom to be spontaneous. So that if my grandkids drop by, I want to be able to drop what I'm doing and not be so overprogrammed that I can't stop and enjoy them. And then one of the things I learned when I was in Italy, when Gail and I were there, is the freedom to do nothing at all. The Italians have a phrase for it. They say, la friente, how is it? La dolce far niente, which means the freedom or the sweetness of doing nothing. And I love that freedom in particular.
Well, and the sweetness of doing nothing, isn't it in the fact that, well, there is stuff that I could be doing, but I don't have to do it. I've done the important stuff, or I know where I'm at in that process. I'm guilt-free.
Totally. One of the amazing things that happens when you're doing nothing is that some of the times when you had the biggest breakthroughs, it could be a relational breakthrough. It could be a creative breakthrough. It could be, a productivity breakthrough. But yeah, we've got to give ourselves space to think, to breathe, to reclaim our lives.
Yeah, I know. I hadn't heard of the rest book until you suggested it a little over a year ago, and it's made a huge impact on my life. It's not just unplugging. It's being intentional with rest. It's doing different types of activity that are, you can be actively resting, which was just a crazy idea to me, but I love that. I love saying, you know what? Like, I can go out and do an alternate activity that is not something I typically do during the work week. And I'm not even saying that you can only rest on the weekends, but like to be able to go for a long bike ride and to get great ideas from that and not even go into it with the idea of getting ideas, but that they come
Right.
to you because you're operating different parts of your body, different parts of your brain, that ultimately the place that rest plays in productivity, which is huge also, by the way, in the full focus planner as well as free to focus. I love this intentionality and focus on that.
Yeah, rejuvenation is the third chapter in the book. And the whole first section of the book is about stopping. Mm-hmm. And, just taking a pause, taking a break and thinking about, reflecting upon how we're doing our work, what's important to us, what's the end game for all this productivity. And as it turns out, rejuvenation is significantly important in the whole mix.
Well, and that's, you said the key word there, stop. Or stopping. And we're not just talking about stopping to rest, but stopping doing things that we shouldn't be doing, right?
Yeah, totally. So there's three parts to the book. So the first part is stop, which is, I think, very counterintuitive because most of us, when we think of productivity, getting more stuff done, we think about go, act, get started, get in the game, make something happen. But I found for me as a achiever, and that's my top strength, for me, I've got to stop. I've got to take a look around and I've got to be intentional about how I'm going to move forward. So the first chapter, as you know, is formulate, to get a vision for what your productivity is going to look like and what is the end beyond productivity that you're going to accomplish by means of productivity. Then the second chapter there is to evaluate, to ask yourself, okay, where am I now? What is the stuff that's crowding my life, whether it's tasks, appointments, opportunities, and I provide, as you know, a filter, a grid called the Freedom Compass in that chapter, so that people can evaluate the kind of work that, or find the kind of work that's the most important, the greatest leverage of all. And in that third chapter, in that first section on stop, I talk about rejuvenate and talk about things like rest. As it turns out, there's nothing more important to your productivity or your focus than getting a good night's sleep. And we all know this intuitively because when you're tired, for example, and you're trying to read a book, you'll find yourself rereading the same page or the same paragraph over and over again because you're too tired to focus, too tired to be productive. So sometimes the most productive thing you could do is just get a good night's sleep. So that's kind of the first section of the book.
I remember last time that you were on, we were talking actually about the upcoming Free to Focus course or at least the update. And we spent a large chunk of time talking about napping and your work flow for that and how you do that pretty much every day. And so I'm going to make sure to link that up in the show notes. We don't need to retread that here, but I can say this. When you were so adamant about how important that was, I took it seriously for the first time in a long time. And suddenly, I would say on average now, I personally, based on your advice, I think I'm 3 or 4 times out of the week taking a nap, especially on the weekends. I make sure in the full focus planner to mark down naps almost every single Saturday and Sunday that I can.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have them literally on my calendar. My assistant knows to put them there. And there's occasions like when we're batch producing podcasts and doing 13 episodes over 2 days that I don't get to take a nap. And so I kind of grind through it. But I would say probably 90% of the time I take a nap every single day, weekdays and weekends.
So talking again, the whole stopping thing and moving into the Freedom Compass, as you mentioned, one of the things there that obviously we want to try and get into is the desire zone, the working in your desire zone. And I, having gone through the course, I understand fully what this means. I've even gone through the worksheets and worked on it, sitting there in the seminars, talking with that. And I was trying to kind of come up with hard questions for you. And I kept thinking, where are the places people get the most kind of a snag in their planning as they go through Free to Focus? And I thought it's that desire zone. Like it's hard to get to in the sense that we feel like we don't have enough agency to move towards doing more work in that area or more time allotted towards that. Would you explain what the desire zone is as compared to some of the other zones? And
sure.
I think that people need to really kind of flip a switch on their perspective on this.
Yeah, let me see if I can describe it. This is a little bit challenging in an audio podcast without a visual, but just people can use their imaginations. So imagine a circle that represents a compass. That compass has north, south, east, west. It's divided into 4 quadrants. So if you could imagine a 2x2 matrix, and I don't want people to get tangled up on this, but rotated 45 degrees, so that the top quadrant is where passion and proficiency come together. So passion, by that I mean work that you actually enjoy, work that you love, work that gives you joy. Doesn't mean it's always easy, but it's deeply satisfying. Then on the other hand is the proficiency. That comes together there too. And this is work that you're actually good at. So there are times when we're proficient, but we don't love the work, or maybe we love doing this kind of work, but we're not good at it yet. Sometimes it's neither of those. So on this compass, at north, due north, is where passion and proficiency come together. I call that the desire zone. If you go exactly due south, all the way to the bottom of the compass, that's south. That's where you don't want to be. And we call that the drudgery zone, where you're not passionate about the work, you don't enjoy it, and you're not good at it. You just don't have a proficiency with it. For me, that would be things like managing my calendar, booking my own travel, any kind of administrative work, anything that's repetitive. My assistant Jim, on the other hand, loves that stuff. That's where that for him is in his desire zone, but it's in my drudgery zone. Then you've got, in addition to that, work which you may be really, really good at, but don't particularly enjoy it. For me, that was accounting. I did my accounting at my business, Michael Hyatt and Company, for a couple of years because I was good at it, but I didn't like it. And I call that the disinterest zone. And then opposite of that, so again, thinking of the compass, this would be the western quadrant, where you may love something, but you're not good at it or not good at it yet. And I call that the distraction zone. That's where you go typically to escape from the real work in your desire zone that moves the needle forward in your business. So the desire zone is really where you want to focus. For me, today, I spend 95% of my time in the desire zone. It's work that I love, and it's work that I'm really good at. And I stay out of work that's in any of those other three zones. There's somebody else in my company that can do that work and has the desire for it.
So I think the thing that hit me as to why I claimed that it was, and again, I fully believe you can get to the desire zone like you have. I think the struggle to get there for most people is going to be twofold. Number one, they've not sat down and figured out the compass for themselves. Right. So that's the first part. The second part is that even if they have figured it out, they don't feel like they have enough agency or time or resources to be able to delegate to others or automate or move things off their plate in let's see if I can remember right here. Actually, I have it right here. Let me open this up. The Freedom Compass. So even in the stuff that they're proficient in, they don't, and don't have a desire to do, it's the distraction zone, it's a disinterest zone, especially the drudgery zone stuff. Moving those three zones, out or off or, to other people, so somebody would say, hey, Michael Hyatt, it's great that you get to spend so much time in the desire zone, but you have a team. But the thing is like, you've built that up over time. It's not an instantaneous transformation, but that doesn't mean change is impossible, right?
Totally. Well, so let me just kind of go back to 2011 when I left the big corporate world where I was running what had been a public company. Then we ended up selling it to HarperCollins. But I had 2 full-time assistants. I had 650 employees. I stepped out of that world into a world where now I was a solopreneur. It was just me. So I'm trying to manage my calendar. I'm managing my inboxes. I'm managing my social media accounts. I'm booking my travel and trying to find the FedEx box when I've got an overnight package to ship. And so I'm doing all this stuff that I hadn't done in probably about 2 decades. And it was not an efficient use of my time. So I could have sat there and I could have said, look, I don't have a team. I just got to suck it up and get used to it. But what I realized, especially as a solopreneur, was that nobody was paying me. My clients, my customers, were not paying me to book my travel. They weren't paying me to manage my calendar or find the FedEx box. And every moment that I spent doing that stuff was time that I couldn't bill out to people who were willing to pay me for my time. So I thought, what if I hired an executive assistant, which I did from a company called Belay, and I hired them for 5 hours a week. And that lasted about 2 weeks. And all of a sudden, that reclaimed at least 5 hours a week that I could turn around and now actually sell that time to somebody else who would pay me, which, they paid me a much higher rate than I was paying Trisha, my assistant, So it was a net gain. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yep. And so you were able to, well, one, I want to say this. You struggled just like everybody else has struggled. You stepped right into, you stepped in it. In other words.
Right.
Oh, yeah. And by doing that, so in other words, you've experienced that almost helpless feeling of, and not everybody listening here right now is a one-man show like you were or like I am, but they know that from hearing you say it, in other words, they hear your experience and they know, oh, okay, the possibility is there. It's not that you're saying like again, this was 2011 and it's now 2019. This is 8 years on into your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to start where you are. And that's what chapter 2 is all about. You got to start where you are. And then you've got to incrementally move out of that. So I didn't just say, oh, great, I've got a virtual assistant for 5 hours a week. Now I'm going to delegate everything that's not in my desire zone. And I'm going to, be doing work I love and all that. No, I started by delegating first the drudgery zone stuff, the stuff that I didn't enjoy and I wasn't any good at. And that was, first of all, not did that just free up the hours, but you've only got so much energy for that kind of grinding, soul-crushing work. And so for me to get that off my plate, it was just like a huge emotional drag was lifted from me. So start small and move forward. And I think this is where we have to be very careful that we don't trip up on our limiting beliefs. And limiting beliefs, I talk about that in Your Best Year Ever. I talk about that in Free to Focus. But people have a lot of limiting beliefs around productivity, including I don't have control of my time. Maybe you're a mid-level manager or you work for somebody else. Well, here's what I would say. I say, first of all, forget about having control over all your time. But the time you do have discretion over, let's see if we can put that to better use and at least manage that in a better way.
One of the reasons people say they don't have the time is because they're misusing it unintentionally. They're not taking careful thought as to what they're doing with the tools they have at their disposal. I know you recently read Cal Newport's new book, Digital Minimalism. He was just on the show talking about this. And you went through this process of creating what you've called a minimalist phone. And I'd love for you to walk through that thought process of why you thought you needed to do that and decision-making processes to start to finish as to how you've arrived at where you're at now.
Yeah. Wow. This has been a journey. So one of the things I started realizing, I wrote an entire book on social media called Platform, social media and blogging and all that. And so I was an early advocate for social media, but something happened, over the course of the last decade, and that is these big social media companies have essentially weaponized their powers to destroy your attention. And here's what it looks like. It's their business model is completely at odds with our desire to do more focused work. Because what they realized, and I read this in Cal's book, I think it was back in the 1830s, when the guy that came up with the penny newspapers realized that instead of just selling newspapers and getting all of his money from the customers that read the newspapers, he could make more money if he would collect those eyeballs and resell them to advertisers. Well, eventually, radio was built on that same model. Television was built on that same model. And yes, social media is built on that same model. So it's like somebody has said, I don't know who said this, you may know, but if you're not buying a product, you are the product. And that's exactly what happens with Facebook. I'm a product. My eyeballs, my attention, my focus is a product that Facebook is reselling to the highest bidder. So I started to notice that even though I deal with productivity, that I was becoming increasingly distracted by social media, by Slack, by email, just the multiplicity of inboxes in our life. It was hard to get work done. So last summer, I read, I don't know if you've read this, Erik, but Jaron Lanier's book, and I think it's called something like, 10 Reasons Why You Should Quit Social Media Right Now. He's a very famous technologist from the Silicon Valley. So it really made me perk up and listen as I read that book. And it was radical. And one of the things I realized is that those big social media companies, that those people are not even letting their kids be active in social media or on screens very much because they realize what a negative impact that has on our cognition, on our social development, and certainly on our productivity. But I felt like that book was a little bit too radical. So when Cal's book came out, and I'm a huge Cal Newport fan, and thankfully he endorsed Free to Focus. I was very grateful for that. But he gave me a much more, I think, moderate or reasoned approach to it. So what I did was I turned my smartphone into a dumb phone. And I'm going to tell you what I did. I took email off. I took Slack off. I took off all social media with one exception, with Instagram, because I'm really trying to build my Instagram following. But check this out. So what I did on Instagram was I used screen time, which is a feature of the iOS operating system. And I went and took screen time and I limited my use of Instagram by 30 minutes. But I know myself. And I know what happens when you use screen time. It'll come up and it will say, you've reached your app limit. Do you want to extend it by 15 minutes, or do you just want to forget about the limits for today? Well, if I ran up against the limit, I'd punch the button. So I'd cheat. So what I did was I gave my phone to my wife and I said, look, I want you to enter in a password to control screen time that I don't know. I don't want you to share it with me. I do want you to share it with my assistant in case there's an emergency, but I don't want to have access to it. And so that's what she did. Here's what's happened to me. My phone is almost irrelevant now. I went to dinner last night with a couple, and I almost didn't get it out of the car. I just thought, why am I taking this in? I mean, unless there's an emergency phone call. And the only reason I took it in is because I wanted to take a photo of us together. So that, believe it or not, dumb phones have made a resurgence. And I went on the quest looking for this. Is there just a phone out there that didn't provide all the smartphone features? Because I don't need all that stuff. I want to confine that. I want to quarantine it to specific times in my day when I can get in and get out and not be distracted.
Yeah, I saw you asking the questions about, what are the dumb phone, what are the smart yet dumb phone alternatives out there? And there just doesn't seem to be anything out there just yet we've not, like how there were smartphones before the iPhone. We've not had the same equivalent, iPhone of dumb phones come out just yet that is a mass market adoptable.
Well, there actually are a couple that are pretty cool. Like there's the Palm phone, PALM.
Yes.
The Palm phone is very cool because Sprint is the only carrier that offers it. But it's a dumb phone, limited phone, but it actually tethers to your main phone, and tethers in the way that your device can ring when somebody calls your phone number. It can ring on both devices, so you can just take this little kind of sidekick phone, the Palm phone, with you when you only want access to like text messaging and a phone. The coolest one of all, though, the one, and I've actually ordered this one, is the Light phone, Light, the Light Phone 2, and it's about the size of a credit card, and it just does text and phone. It's very cool.
Yeah, I will probably be picking that one up as well. I just, my comment is more towards we're still in the early days of that. And I think still people don't necessarily have the awareness of the necessity of,
right.
Still being able to get benefits out of the technology without losing the benefits and just chucking it all together. So
well, you can totally do it on your iPhone if you're intentional about it. That's what I did, and I love having a great camera with me. And I've become very dependent on the camera on the iPhone, so I got the same thing now. Yeah. Essentially.
So psychologically, though, how does it feel? Like, how do you feel now? I mean, obviously, you didn't take the phone. Well, you did take the phone in, but only to again. You thought you had the forethought. I can leave this behind. Oh wait, no, I want to use it for a picture. But then you did. But then probably nothing else, right?
That's it. Nothing else. Here's what it looks like. When I'm at dinner, like I was last night with my wife, Gail, and with this couple that we loved hanging out with, I was fully present. I didn't feel this compulsion, and that's what it is because dopamine's at work. I didn't feel this compulsion to be checking my phone, or when I would get bored. Or here's what I used to do. I'd get up to go use the restroom, take my phone with me, and check some of my inboxes while I'm in the restroom, right? I mean, yeah. And one of the things that screen time will tell you that's a little bit scary is how many times you pick up your phone every day. And the average person is picking up their phone 150 to 200 times a day, which sounds like it's not possible. But look at screen time and see how many times you're picking it up. I just don't pick up my phone that much anymore. And it's freed up time to read, to enjoy my friends. I say the word, it feels like freedom.
I've got to imagine that at first you were thinking, okay, I'll reach for it. But then you realize there's really nothing there for you to use that is, worthy of diving in on. And so you turn back to the desktop again, where you were actually working on something. So the distractions, which is, again, a key piece of what the book is helping you deal with, the distractions start to melt away.
They do. And it's amazing how much you can do and how much you can accomplish when you're totally focused. I mean, think about how you are on that Friday before you leave on a 1-week vacation. I mean, most of us on that Friday before we leave on vacation are hyper focused. We have the ability to concentrate. We don't get distracted by frivolous or trivial matters because we know we've got a limited amount of time to get our work done so that we can be free to go on our vacation. Well, that kind of intensity, that kind of focus can really be ours every day. Maybe not quite that high, but when we eliminate the distractions and become very focused, and when we establish constraints or boundaries, that can really work for us in terms of our productivity.
Yeah. I will say this. A friend of mine listened to Cal talking on my show and said, you know what? We should totally do something for Lent with our phones. And I said, well, I know of someone, referencing you, and he's done that. And I thought, let's do this. So we sat down together and we started offloading apps and putting them in folders and putting them away. And literally the only thing I can do on my phone right now is calling and texting. Nothing else.
That's awesome.
So
what's the effect been for you?
I've done it now. I mean, we're not yet into Lent, but we decided to do it ahead of time so that we could see where we may want to tweak it or make an allowance occasionally just for, work's sake or whatever, and not go into it, and then quit it. So I can say now 4 days in, I think, that I have stopped, I've stopped reaching for the phone because I know it's not necessary. I don't need it. So
that took me about 3 or 4 days too. Yeah. It was just, I had basically trained my neurophysiology in a compulsive way to do that. And it took about 3 to 4 days to break the habit where I can now be conscious of the fact that I'm reaching for the phone. I also created a home screen and a lock screen that has the word focus on it.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah.
It's just a reminder too.
Yeah. Right now, I mean, I even moved everything off the front screen. So it's literally just at the bottom. It's my settings, the text message app, and the phone call app. And it's a big slab of black. And then those 3 icons at the very bottom. And it just feels like, oh, there's nothing there. Never mind. Put it back down.
You know what's funny about that is, I don't know what particular phone you have, but I have the iPhone XS Max.
Yeah, the 10S or the 10S Max. We've got the same phone.
Yeah. And so for me, I would not have paid over $1,000 for this phone, given the limited functionality I have now. But
right.
So I think this kind of thing is a big threat to these device manufacturers. But if they don't become part of the solution and people perceive them as part of the problem, I think it's going to hurt their marketability.
Yeah. I got to ask this though. Are you still using the Apple Watch? And if so, how does that factor into this new phone?
Well, but basically my Apple Watch, mirrors everything that's going on my phone. So it's also got limited functionality. I've got my time, I've got my next appointment that I'm seeing, I've got the temperature outside, I've got how many steps I've taken today, and how much is charged and the date, but not very much information. I mean, it's basically a dashboard. And here's where I'll use it. Here's the other reason, by the way, I like my iPhone is when I go to the gym or I go for a run or a walk, I want to be able to listen to podcasts. And I can control those, as you know, for the Apple Watch, so I can pause or whatever. I also want to be able to track my mileage when I'm out for a run or out for a walk, and I can do that from my watch. But honestly, I don't get a lot of use out of the watch either.
It's not just a paring back of technology for the sake of that. It's the coming up with a digital technology strategy like Cal talks about. You're assessing each on its merits of what value does it bring you, and is the time you're trading using that tool worth the value that it brings?
Well, and for example, we just recently went through this with our company where, we're a company full of tech enthusiasts. We have 35 full-time people right now, and people would discover something and they'd throw it into Slack, and then everybody would get sidetracked by that. And, we had people using to share content Evernote, some people were using Notion, some people were using Workflowy, some people were using Google Docs, some people were using Word. And we said, wait, as an organization, we have got to simplify our tech stack and be very intentional in terms of the tools we use to collaborate. And so, for example, in terms of sharing content, we settled on Google Docs. It has the best collaboration features. It doesn't have all the amazing depth and functionality of Word, but guess what? We never use all that stuff. It doesn't have some of the cool, fun stuff that Notion has or some of the things that Evernote has, but it just works. And we don't need every feature. We just need the right features. And why spend all of our time trying to learn new technology instead of doing what we really want to do, which is the work, which is let technology be the servant. We need to be creating the content. We need to be marketing that. And that's the real work. And you could spend so much time trying to find the applications with the most functionality, but it takes training time, it takes maintenance. And for what? A lot of times it just introduces more complexity. And complexity is so often the enemy of progress. It slows you down.
Yeah, man. I hope that as we've been talking here and people have been listening in, that they can see kind of why I said, like, free to focus is really the place to start over, I mean, again, best year ever would also be a great place to start, but that being on the ground level, dealing with stopping things appropriately, getting into figuring out the compass, figuring out where and when you can get into the desire zone more. And definitely, most definitely, talking about figuring out what we've just talked about for a stint here, which is dealing with distractions in one particular form, but multiple forms. Because if you can have, again, some quick wins in these areas, you're freeing yourself up. There's that word again, to have that freedom to then focus and start to, again, you can have your best year ever then. You can then live forward, right?
Exactly right. And all of a sudden, you don't feel so overwhelmed. You don't risk or face burnout because you've got a manageable workload. And this is kind of the measure for me. And this is what I meant earlier by putting restraints or constraints on your work. It used to be back in my early career, probably for the first 15, maybe 20 years of my career, I would drag work home after I left the office, get the kids fed, and then I would be right back on my laptop cranking out some work. But here was the psychology of it. And I would drag work into the weekends. I'd work typically on Saturday morning. And here was the psychology. It'd be 3:00 in the afternoon. I wasn't really making any progress. I'd go, down the hall and visit with a friend, or I'd waste my time on something else because I thought to myself, I don't need to finish by 5 or 6. I can just take this home and do it tonight. Well, then you enter into a situation where it's total work and you're working all the time. And I first heard Andy Stanley talk about this concept of putting a constraint or a hard boundary on your quitting time. He did it when he founded North Point Community Church, and he would leave the office, I think it was maybe at 4 every afternoon. And what he found was that he didn't have time to waste during the day because he said, look, I can't drag this home. That's not an option because that's the rule I've created. And that's been the same for me. My lights go out at 6 p.m. in my office. They're automated. And if I keep working, I'm standing in the dark. So it's a great cue. But because of that, I'm much more productive during the day. I don't work on the weekends. I have a hard rule about that so that I don't think about work. I don't read about work. I don't listen to podcasts. I don't read about business books. I don't talk about work because I want to rest and rejuvenate so that I bring my A game to work on Monday morning when I show up fully rested. So those constraints, again, counterintuitively, have made me way more productive than just saying, no, I can work anytime. I love my work. I'm not going to put any constraints on it.
Well, and I've even heard you say your spin on Parkinson's law, which, Parkinson's law is the work expands to fill the time allotted for its completion. But I've heard you say work also can contract to the time allotted for its completion.
Yes.
So
totally
getting your handle on this stuff, this rubber meets the road, practical day in, day out stuff is what Free to Focus honestly has done for me, going through the course digitally as well as face to face, and now the book. And I want to get as many people to get their hands on the book as possible. This is dropping right when the book is out. You should go grab it. Do you have a preference of where people can go check out more or grab the book in the most ideal place for you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it'll be available at, better booksellers everywhere. But I would go to freetofocusbook.com, freetofocusbook.com, because there we give you some amazing bonuses when you buy the book. You could buy it through Amazon. You could buy it through Barnes & Noble. You could buy it in the airport. Doesn't matter. But just go there, enter your receipt number, and that'll unlock the bonuses. And there'll be some cool stuff there for you to implement this and make better use of it.
Perfect. I always love the book bonuses. They're always well worth the
I do too.
The effort. Yeah. So, Michael, again, I can't thank you enough for, honestly, Free to Focus and the effect it's had on my life. I know it's going to do a lot more good for people out there listening. So thanks again for being here, and stop by again soon.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Eric. Appreciate it.
All right, another episode of Beyond the To-Do List is in the can. Thanks again to Michael for talking with me about Free to Focus, digital minimalism, and how he did that on his smartphone, turning it into a dumb phone and helping him focus. I've been doing the same thing. If you have questions about that, feel free to shoot me a message. You can find the show notes for this episode at beyondthetodolist.com/268, and make sure to go grab the Free to Focus book. You can find the link for it at those show notes. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it. Again, the sharing links are there at beyondthetodolist.com/268, and I will see you next episode.